Hi, I'm Paul Page, and welcome to the Racer to Racer podcast. It's going to be a great time now, and it's all brought to you by Race 92.
You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com to see the many different shirts and other merchandising options we offer. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAtee, our other co-host. You may have seen him walking out of a great clips with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Scott Bowie. Hey, Scott.
Hello, Aaron. How are you, buddy?
It's going great. Before we get into this, I just want to make sure everyone knows to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else our podcast can be found. We have a great show today. I don't even need to say who it is, because if you were listening to the intro, you already know who it is.
Yeah, Paul Page was, incredibly kind to come on this show. Very open, very honest. Answered some questions that I wouldn't say were hardball questions, but were questions that he could have easily dodged.
Right.
Because he still has a job in that world, and he didn't have to answer some of the questions that we had, but he was very kind to do that. And he definitely has opinions on the state of IndyCar racing and where he believes it should be, and how he thinks it could be better. And he kind of discusses why he thinks it isn't. So, just a big thank you to Paul. And I lied to Paul. I told him I would have a copy of his book. I don't have a copy of his book, but thankfully Aaron does. And please go out and purchase this man's book. This is his life's work, his life story. And he wrapped it all up in a bow for us and put it in a book. There will be an audio version in the future as well. And but please go buy the hard copy book. I don't buy as many books as I used to, but when I buy books, I love buying the hard copies, the hardback. They feel so much better. And, audio books are great, especially on car trips. Man, there's nothing like just turning pages and reading a book.
And speaking of audiobooks, this book is available on audiobooks is my understanding, and he's actually going to be doing the voice for that. So I think I'm going to prefer to probably listen to that than actually read, because that'll be pretty cool.
I'll probably do both, most likely.
Right.
But yeah, it'll. He's done a lot of things besides auto racing, and a lot of things besides announcing, and he's had some pretty harrowing experiences in his life that he touches base on, but there's more of it in the book than, we didn't want him to share his book on our podcast. So We want people to go buy it. So, but yeah, he was so kind and generous for coming on our show. And he was on here. I don't know how much of the show we are going to have on here, but we talked for probably 2.5, nearly 3 hours in total length. So yeah, again, thank you to Paul Page. We appreciate it.
Oh yeah, and when we started this podcast, he was on my list of kind of dream guests to have, and I would never dream in a million years that he would be one of our first 15 guests or whatever. So it definitely was really cool to have him on that soon, and enjoy talking to him. And he's just passionate about the sport. It's more than just a job for him. He's at the track whether he's getting paid or not. And that's something I think a lot of fans appreciate. And that's one thing I really like about Paul Page is, you can tell when he's reporting on something, he cares about it and he's passionate about it, and he cares just as much, if not more, than the fans.
You know what? To his humility, this is a man who wants to do a good job.
Right.
He when he talks about things, you can tell that he just doesn't think, this is my show and I'm the guy. He firmly wants to please the viewers. He wants to strive to make things better, because I think in a lot of ways he can put himself as that fan, but he's the one who gets to talk about the racing, and he wants that fan to have that experience that he has. And so I knew I would enjoy it, but it was even more than I thought.
Right. And one thing I thought was really interesting is, one thing we talk about, and one of the more difficult questions is, what is IndyCar, doing different today than, they could be doing or whatever. And he kind of approaches it from a different angle that I would have never thought of. He's more on like the production side, camera angles and stuff you would never think of. And I thought that was really interesting.
I agree. And that's definitely, that's definitely obviously using his experience and using what he knows. And what it's easy to forget is like, he's been in these meetings. He knows what goes on behind the scenes. He knows what the budget talks are like. He knows how the people who run these, these outlets, how they actually view the sport. And so he brings really, for lack of a better term, an insider's perspective to something that we only get to really see from the outside. We're not car owners, we're not drivers, we're not crew members. So we don't get to see the inner workings of that quite as much.
Yeah, and that's kind of a whole different angle too, even a different angle if you were to ask a driver or crew member. So really, really cool discussion we had. And before we get into that interview, I think we should touch a little bit about recent news. So this past weekend, Alex Palou gets his second win.
Yeah, and to invoke Marshall Pruitt, the cartoon anvil has yet again fallen on Joseph Newgarden and Team Penske in another stunning turn of events. He has essentially gearbox problems, shifting problems at the end of the race on the last restart. He radioed in early in the race and said he had a problem, but it was for a brief moment. It got stuck, I believe he said, in third gear, but it quickly solved itself. And what we don't know is if maybe this problem they had, because at the time they said they looked at the data, they didn't see anything else going wrong. Mm-hmm. As the race was going, they may have started having more and more issues. And of course, they didn't talk about it because you're not going to talk about it because you don't want your competitors to get that advantage on you.
Sure.
And but it all came apart again right at the end.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and definitely, and Alex probably should have won a couple other races, Indy 500 maybe being one of them.
Right.
But I mean, he's going to be. He's going to be something. He may win the championship, so we'll see. Scott's kind of fallen back a little bit,
although they had a miraculous save again.
Yep.
I mean, yes, he lost points to the leader, but he runs fourth in a race that they had to repair the car twice before qualifying. He tore up the under tray once. He hit some debris. I think he had contact with the car that did some other damage, and then the Ganassi PNC team had to just work and work and work this weekend. I forget we qualified. I don't think it was top 10. Qualified maybe 13th, something around there. And just through that team's efforts, one team got the win, but that 9 car all of a sudden at the end of the race is fourth. And just hanging on, just a dog on a bone. Like maybe this won't be their year, and maybe Alex will win the championship. But if they can ever just turn around some of what they're kind of going through at the moment, it's going to be a hell of a fight.
Oh, absolutely. And there for a while, if Askew would have stayed out an extra lap, would have been interesting to see.
Man, yeah, I don't think he could have made it though because it's a 4-mile track.
Not, right.
But man, it would have been interesting to see what they would have done. Because I don't know how much the point fight really means to him. So if they thought they could nurse it home to a win, just run 2 laps. I think that's what the last restart was just 2 laps. If they thought that they could get there from there, I mean, of course, what's and ifs, right? But wow, yeah, I mean, it was a big gamble. It almost paid off for him.
Yeah. And then on other news, Kyle Larson's on a winning streak in NASCAR.
He's on a winning streak everywhere. Now, he didn't win last night in Houston in the sprint car, but he is absolutely on a tear, and he's making a lot of drivers start thinking about, hey, how much racing am I going to have to do to figure out how to catch this guy? Because, Larson's running 2-3 nights a week before he ever gets back in that car on Saturdays and Sundays. And, and he's openly saying now, he goes, I think that's a huge advantage for me.
Yeah.
And that's something that he really didn't get. He didn't have quite that luxury at Chips, although he had more leeway. And Hendrick really kind of stopped, kind of made, I wouldn't say a special rule, but kind of relaxed his rules for Kyle. And I think the thought process is this guy's a thoroughbred and you just got to let him race.
Yeah, it's making him better. I mean, I think it's helping him win NASCAR races. I totally agree.
So too. It's like I've said before, this guy doesn't view a race in a vacuum. Like he's saying, he goes, I can pick things up that I think helps me on Sunday, and I'm picking things up on Sunday that I think can help me during the week. And this guy, and we interviewed another guest that we're going to have on here, I believe next show, which would be Paul Goldsmith. And Paul Goldsmith, oddly enough, had a lot of the same views. We don't go into as much detail. Paul Goldsmith talks about, race cars are just race cars, racing's just racing. And his job was to figure out how to go fast because that's how he earned his living. And I think that's what Kyle Larson does. Kellen Conover, who was on our Chili Bowl episode, he and I were just talking about this about an hour ago, and we're talking about Christopher Bell. Christopher Bell is someone I feel has all the same talent as Larson with Gibbs. Guess what? Not racing.
Right.
They're putting that horse in the barn. And Chris isn't having the performances that Kyle is. Now, he hasn't run in Cup as long, and he's just now with, the top layer teams. But you got to start wondering, hey, if maybe Gibbs ain't going to have to change that thought process a little bit and let this guy run a little bit, because they're thoroughbreds. They have to race.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion on it. I saw earlier David Land released a video calling Kyle Larson the new, basically saying he's the new AJ Foyt. Well, there'll never be another AJ Foyt. There'll never be another Parnelli. There's never be another Mario, Bobby, all those guys. He's the first. To me, he's the first Kyle Larson. Is he a throwback to those guys? Sure. Do I think Kyle Larson could win in absolutely anything he gets into?
Yeah,
I do, and I'm talking the top flight of any series. I think if he's in equal equipment in F1, I think it wouldn't take very long for him to be running up front. I feel the same way about IndyCar. I mean, this guy is just a special talent, and unfortunately, he was very immature last year. Said something he should never said, and it cost him, not only it cost him money, it cost him a lot of humiliation, I should say, and really cost Chip Ganassi because Chip had no other options.
Right.
That he put Chip in a really bad spot, and but the guy went on a redemption tour last year and dirt racing, won everything there was, and now we're seeing kind of a Kyle Larson that's really I feel like anytime I watch him on the racetrack, it's all business. And that when I was watching him last year during midweek, I said to Robin after he won one of the races, I said, look at him, he's getting out of the car, he celebrates for a little bit, then he gets his look on his face, and it's all right back to business. And that's what I'm seeing in this Cup cars. Like, he's getting out of the car, he celebrates a little bit, and then you can see it in his face.
Yeah.
You can see the look in his face, and he goes do some interviews and that, but then he's right off to another race. And, eventually you run enough sprint cars and midgets, you're going to bust your ass. That's just how it is. And, you can get hurt in a Cup car. I mean, so I'm not going to say that he isn't going to get some sort of injury because, especially in sprint cars and midgets, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to have a really good one. And I'm not saying he's going to get horribly injured or anything like that, but you have some crashes that really get your attention. You ring your bell a little bit, and it's bound to happen. But right now, man, he is on a roll and on a tear like I've never seen.
Yep, and I definitely don't think he's stopping anytime soon.
I don't think so either. I got a feeling this is going to be all summer, and like I kind of alluded to earlier, some of these guys, I guarantee, are sitting at home thinking, man, this guy's making me look really bad. I'm going to have to figure something else. I'm going to have to start racing more during the week. I might have to start doing something because this guy is. I mean, this guy, when you're getting dominated like that, some people start losing their jobs or
right,
or getting beat like this every week.
I mean, he shows up, drives a sprint car, and he's racing against people that race every single night. And, he maybe goes a couple weeks without getting in the car, and he gets in the car, and he just makes other people look bad. It's just insane.
Yeah, it really is. It really is something to behold. And like I said, he's not another Foyt, but he is a Kyle Larson. And anybody out there, boy, you need to catch it while you can, because this does not come around and happen very often. Now, I'll tell you another ripple effect of this, which you're going to see, is you're going to see race car drivers, the same effect that Stewart and Gordon had in the sport, you're going to start seeing Larson have with these drivers who are younger coming up and who are watching him, and they're watching how he operates and some of the things he does on the racetrack and how he races. And I mean, the competition level is just going to keep rising and rising and rising, because these young kids are going to start figuring out how he does some things and how his thought process, like not unlike how Michael Jordan changed the game of basketball. You have these figures who come along through sports every so often that change the game. Kyle Larson is that guy. And
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's pretty impressive. But you're talking about the IndyCar deal, and we were talking about the IndyCar deal. Alex Palou, his whole thing with winning races, he actually goes and gets a chicken dinner after he wins. Yeah. So there's a place in town called Hollyhock Hill that was closed on Monday. He couldn't go. I forget where he went. He went somewhere else in town. He said if he wins again, he's going to go into Iron Skillet up here off 30th Street, get chicken. So that's like his new thing now. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did not know that. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. He's a young kid, enjoying life, enjoying his career, and Pato's the same way. And IndyCar's future is so bright.
Yeah, I don't remember, anything really ever like this. I mean, think about, I just can't think of where, we have all these new winners in 1 year like that. It's just crazy. Definitely really cool to see, and definitely looking forward to the future.
Yeah, and these guys have big talent too. This isn't like these aren't guys, getting a win here on fuel strategy, getting a win there, something else crazy happening, like they catch the yellow at the right time. I mean, these guys are racing for the wins, and these guys have immense talent. And like I said, the sport, the future is so bright for it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think we'll go ahead and jump into the Paul Page interview. Make sure buy his book if you haven't already. It can be found on Amazon or anywhere where books are sold for the most part.
Wherever, if there are brick and mortar stores anymore, I don't know if there are. It's with COVID and everything, you don't go out very much. You don't know if stores are still actually open. But all kidding aside, please go out and purchase this man's book, and please enjoy this interview as much as we did. I always say the word interview. I really should use the word discussion, because that's what we really have. And
right.
I can't emphasize enough how much I enjoyed it. So please enjoy.
It's kind of a long one, but definitely stick around and listen to the whole thing. It's definitely worth it. Our guest today is a former voice of the Indianapolis 500 and is a broadcasting legend. He is in the IMS Hall of Fame and is a multi-Emmy Award winner. He recently released a book called Hello, I'm Paul Page. It's Race Day in Indianapolis. We are joined by the man himself, Paul Page. Hey, Paul, how are you?
Aaron, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Doing great. Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. And me and Scott are definitely the weak link in this interview.
Yeah, good to see you too, Scott. How's everything?
Hey, great. It's always good.
Yeah, good.
So obviously you've been a race fan. I know I've looked up some stuff about you, and your first Indy 500 was 1960. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. Yep.
So you went to the race and you just kind of fell in love with it, and you knew that first day in the track you wanted to be involved.
Yeah, well, the story is, and it's in the book, which is Hello, I'm Paul Page. It's race day in Indianapolis. I ought to have one to hold up in front of me here. I'm screwing this thing up terribly. I don't get the commercial parts of it, so bear with me. I didn't want to go. My parents, I had grown up I'm in a military family, and we had been stationed in Germany, and so I'd seen a Formula One race. And that day, we're talking Moss and Kling and Fangio and those guys. And so then we get stationed at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and my parents say, your uncle down in Indianapolis wants you to come see the Indianapolis 500. Well, I really like my uncle, but they only turn left. That's was pretty much my attitude.
Right.
And so the parents' attitude was, well, you're going. So, okay. I can't argue much with that. And I went, and the deal they had a bus with a police escort, and right into the gate at the corner of Georgetown and 16th Street. And our seats were right up in that grandstand right there. Not a 200-meter walk from where the bus let us off. So that was pretty cool. And then get my seats, and the ceremonies, it's probably an hour and 15 minutes before the race, and the ceremonies are going on. And I'm, this is kind of cool. And then the crowd gets bigger and bigger. And then I'm hearing all these different announcements. Tom Carnegie is, here at the starting line we're talking with, and now the chief steward makes his final inspection of the track, and the Purdue band is here, and on and on and on. And so before the race I had even started, I was into it. I got to be part of this. And then of course 1960 was an awesome race with Roger Ward and Jim Rathman. So that made it even better, and I was hooked. When I left that track, I had to do something. I didn't know what it was going to be. I was going to start as a parts washer or whatever. I had a little broadcasting that I wanted to do. My mom hated it because I wanted to be a disc jockey. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up at the station, the WIBC, which was the flagship station for the radio network, and things just came together for me.
You mentioned Tom Carnegie, and his voice just so powerful and so iconic. And even today, if you were lucky enough to hear him, you can walk in there some days, and it's kind of in the air, I feel. And I think that me personally, his voice and those type of things, and your voice and Bob Jenkins, they're so much a part of the Speedway experience.
Yeah, Tom especially. When he retired, I was talking to the Speedway, and I'm saying, we ought to sample his voice and create MIDI files, and he could be the eternal announcer.
Oh, absolutely.
And absent that, I would think it would be cool to take one of his and he's on it, and a couple of those lines, and just sprinkle them through the PA every now and then. But
I agree.
They want to move forward,
agree.
but I think he's an absolute legend to me. He was always very kind to me and gave me help and pointers. And in fact, I mentioned the standing at the starting line or watching the 60 race, and he would say, here at the starting line, and then he'd interview somebody. And that was so cool because I could see a knot down in the center of the pits, which, that's obviously where the action is happening, and all the color and the cars are on the straightaway. I'm looking straight down the straightaway from my seats. And I just thought every time thereafter, not just that race, but for on and on, every time I would hear that here at the starting line, I thought it was cool. And then one day I didn't have to open the ABC show. And I had, so the hour, actually the 40 minutes before the ceremonies really got going. So I could wander around, and I'm just wandering around there, and I see Tom and I wave at him, and he waves, come over here. And I thought he just wanted to talk. And as I'm approaching, he picks up his mic and he says, "And here at the starting line," and I'm, oh my goodness, this is really happening. So he was a great man.
So talk a little bit about, so obviously Sid Collins was like your mentor. So what was that like, really being with him? And one story I heard that and something I really admire about Sid Collins is you were talking about, you were interviewing, I think at a soapbox derby race.
Yeah.
And then he told you, "Oh, you did a terrible job." And, there's not a lot of people that would, be that honest to you. And that's something that, I would appreciate for sure.
What was great about it was, I mean, his line was, "That's the worst interview I've ever heard." I've just put the tape together and put it on the air, and he's standing in the hallway outside the news studio, and that's the worst I've ever heard. And whoa. Now my heart, okay, I'm never going to work with Sid. I can see it. But then he took me in one of the studios when it's, the day when you had big radio studios, and we just sat in there, and he started teaching me how to do an interview and his method for doing interviews. And then he teach me other stuff. So I worked the hour that the regular news guy was gone at WIBC. So I did 2 newscasts separated by an hour. And Sid was there to, after that second newscast, which was a 7 o'clock newscast, to do his sports show, which was 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. So in that hour, Sid would sit there and talk with me and tell me about how to do things. And he just kept going. But he ended all those sessions with, "Now, we're full on the network. Don't expect to ever work there. But, I'm trying to help you here, kid."
Right. No, that had to be unbelievable. And then so somewhere along the line, Bob Jenkins came along and you kind of returned the favor that the Sid gave to you, right? And it was kind of the same deal.
Yeah, Bob and I are buddies. We've always been buddies. We were both newsmen originally, working at competing stations. He was at WIRE here in Indianapolis, and I was at WIBC. And we talk about racing and what happened at Winchester this weekend and everything. Mm-hmm. So when I had a chance to replace the Turn 4 announcer, I immediately went for Bob, and he was so good. And he and I and the Speedway tried to put a whole series long radio network together in 1978. And that was fun because it was Bob and I and the engineer and the station coordinator, just the 4 of us out there. We'd pick up announcers locally, which helped us in 2 ways. We didn't have to travel an announcer. Everywhere we went, there were good announcers who really knew the tracks locally. Right. And so we'd pick a few of those up, and then they'd get on the air and say, "Hey, I'm going to be on the radio network on this weekend." So that was our start. And then in 1979, when ESPN came around, it wasn't on the air yet. But I got a call from some of my buddies. I was working for NBC Sports now in New York. And I get this call from this guy who used to be at NBC, and he says, "Hey, we're going to do some racing on ESPN." And I'm like, "What's ESPN?" And he tells me, "So it's not on the air. So what am I to think?" And he says, "I need you to go produce. I know you're exclusive as an announcer, but as a producer, you're not. So I need you to produce for me." So I said, "Sure." And the mobile units, the trucks, came from the Christian Broadcasting Network, and we were doing at Eldora Super Speedway, and we did everything: unloading of the cars, hot laps, testing, then all the way finally to the main. But they said, "You got to hire the announcers for this." Okay, so right away I call Bob, and I explain what we're doing, and Bob says, "That's great." And it was good money considering the day and the time.
Right.
And he said, "Well, what are we talking about here? What are we doing?" And I said, "Look, it's a 24-hour sports network. It's never going to last. Just take the money and run." He did for the next 30 years.
My nephew runs midgets a little bit, and long story short, driver couldn't do like a what you'd call it, like when you go somewhere and you got a car, like a signing type thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
And there's a pizza place out in Brownsburg. I can't remember the name of the place, and I apologize if those people are watching. And the other person they had was Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob was kind enough to come over, and he did it. And so at the end of the day, we were packing up because we were actually going racing that night, and we were actually running up at Whitewater, or wherever you want to call it, by where Bob's from. And
right.
Bob had already talked to my nephew a little bit, and he was so excited to talk about that. But what struck me is how Bob was just so kind to even come do something like that.
He is first and above all a gentleman. He loves fans.
Exactly.
He loves talking, and he was perfect for the role.
Right. And one thing that always strikes me about Bob is he always sounds like he's got a smile in his voice.
He does.
It's an amazing thing. The way he expresses himself, he always has a smile.
Well, think about it. And think about it in my regard too. We're two race fans who had nothing going for them, and now we're being paid to go to a race when we'd been clambering over the back gate if we didn't have that thing going for us. So
right,
we were in hog heaven with the fact that we could actually go to races, get in, have all the great credentials, and get paid to do it. That was we were in the tall cotton then.
That's right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say, I was definitely fortunate enough to be able to hear, Tom Carnegie speak at the track, and there's nothing like that. But it's funny how, depending on when you grew up, when you think of the Indy 500, you think of different voices. And I know obviously like the 80s, 90s, they're going to think about Paul Page, early 2000s, Tom Carnegie. And then obviously after that, Bob Jenkins. And now, it's kind of Dave Calabro on the PA. So did you ever actually do like the PA, or you just did the radio, right?
Right. I was asked to do, Doug Bowles asked me to do the PA when I stopped working for the networks. When I was getting away, they wanted younger talent and everything. So he said, well, why don't you come do the PA? And I went somewhere else and tried it. And my style doesn't fit the PA. I talk too fast, and it's an entirely different style. Bob has it down perfect, but I finally said, I don't think I can actually do that. Bob had been doing PA in addition to broadcasting for years. I hadn't. And so I thought it was smarter not to do that. Now, sometimes I wish that I'd tried that a little bit more, but they got Calabro and the gang are such good guys, I love listening to them.
Yeah, he's really good at it. That's for sure. And as a kid, and I'm sure you could probably say the same thing, listening to the race in the way the radio network does it, it is amazing. It truly is. Like throwing it from corner to corner as the action's happening. It's I just don't think there's any better call in sports. I just don't.
I agree with you. That radio network, as long as it's existed, has been unto itself. And when Sid first decided you could do that, nobody else believed you could. Oh, the idea, you got a 2.5 mile track and you got guy out in turn one and all, then it was like wires and everything to get to those corners. And they had big amplifiers at the corners and an engineer there. But he figured it out, and he got all the local stations to cooperate, and he got the whole thing done. And then the people that he brought in, and he schooled me quite some time on who the people needed to be on the radio network. For an example, he said, first of all, they have to have the passion. Okay, I get that. But then he said, and they all have to have different voices. And I said, okay. And he said, because when you're throwing off to somebody without an actual handoff, where you just stop talking and the next guy picks up, which is the way they do it, that voice needs to be different. People need to know when they hear that voice that it's the guy in turn one. And so that was an important part of it. And the fact that we could do what even the big news networks and everything today can't do, we could do everything with voice inflection. And so, I'm talking to you and I'm saying, so he's heading off to turn one, and you hear that and you say, yeah, and here in turn one, those were all styles. They weren't obvious. They had to be developed, and then people had to be trained into doing it. And it continues to amaze me how really, really good they are. I love working with Mark Janes. Davey Hamilton's a hoot. Davey did a lot of radio with me the 2 years that I came back, and they're great. That whole radio network is now and has always been the best, and really good people, and a great broadcast.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just from a fan standpoint, I heard Dan Dockich talking the other day after the race, talking the next day after the race, and it may have been the first time he had really ever paid attention to the radio broadcast. And he was just talking about how he was just mesmerized by it.
Yeah.
And it really is. It to me, it is mesmerizing because, I mean, you can, like you just pointed out, it's amazing how it can be described to the point where in your mind's eye, you can see what's actually happening.
Yeah, and Sid taught us that too. How to not do what television does now today and just say, okay, there's the leader, there's second place. How to segue between all of those, and how to bring out the colors, the excitement, the sense of the crowd, and everything like that. That was all developed by Sid, and then each of us contributed a little more as each of us took over. For example, when I took over, Sid's broadcast was pretty much in the past tense. And it was because, again, these big amplifiers at each turn, and it's the engineer. And so something happens in turn two, and he couldn't jump straight on the air. The engineer had to contact the producer in the booth and tell him, I've got a yellow here, so-and-so hit the wall. And then he would write that on a card and hand it to Sid. And then Sid would lead out to the announcer in turn two. Well, that burned up maybe a full minute in the process. So it was always kind of, it was past tense. Yeah, so-and-so just hit the wall here in two, he looks okay, that kind of reaction. I didn't like that. I knew the technology had grown beyond that. And so I created a system in my first year that's pretty much what everybody uses now as a standard, where I had the announcers all talking off the air, but into my right ear. And I had a button on my panel that I could push. It was like a cough button. And I push it and I could talk to them. So now I can let them know where I'm thinking, what we're going to cover in the race. Now we've got this two-way communications, plus all somebody had to do, say Mark Janes is in turn one, he just says, Mark Janes yellow. And I say, go to turn one of Mark Janes. And so he's in real time now. He's seen the start of something and now he's calling it in real time. And then Jenks added some other stuff as well. So it's a living thing. It grows.
So when you say there's like someone in turn four, where is that person? Are they usually like up where the spotters are, or where are they normally in the stands?
Yeah, they're way up in the top. In fact, if I remember correctly, it may have changed, but both turn 3 and 4 are situated so high up there that they have to bring along a ladder, or there's one left up there, so they can actually get up to the perch that they're working out of. And on the turn 1 position, that's where you're part of the double deck, and you have to climb through a couple little holes to get up into that position. It's pretty cramped. I mean, it's not what you'd call luxury, but it's a great view.
Yeah, I never realized they actually have people in the corners. I guess I just thought, I know like when you guys did the TV, you were in a booth and you couldn't even see the track from the booth, right? Like you were watching it from a TV. Right,
exactly. And think of this too, when we did radio in the early days, we didn't even have a video feed.
Right, exactly.
So that didn't come along until I want to say maybe 1980. So I'd done it 3 years without even a video feed. I think that's right. Don't hold me to dates. I'm not really good at them. Call Donald if you want to know a date. But it was kind of magic, just the whole way that thing fell together, and it was so much fun. I mean, after the end of the race, you put your feet up, and we'd all go down to the radio network office, and the guys would all gather, and most of us had our box lunches, but we hadn't eaten them yet. So we just start sitting there and enjoying the whole thing.
I can only imagine the sense of accomplishment that must feel like when the race is over and everything's went as smooth as it possibly can, smooth as something live can possibly go, and it just you work 364 days basically to get to that point.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, you just hit on what Sid would say. This is a full year job. And you are, as soon as you finish a broadcast, yeah, you've got a little time to sit down and everybody relax. But believe me, the next day we're starting to talk about, well, we did this, we could do that better and this better. And it's a year-long operation where everybody's trying to figure out how we can make it better. And that's another contribution to it. Is it's not a one-man band. The guys are all working together on it. And then when I finally got a monitor, that just helped even more, because now I could see something and say I saw a car start to slide, and I could say, Jim, turn 3, and he'd have it right away. So it speeded up the reaction time even more when we had that. And it also gave us a close-up way to look at some of the cars and some of the issues and some of the pit stops, which our reporters always had to be behind the wall in the pits. So they couldn't necessarily see, there's a whole gang of folks there right up on the pit wall. They couldn't necessarily see the stop clearly. They're up on their toes and looking and all that. Now we had television and the cameras on the other side of the track taking the picture. So I can be pushing, again, that button that takes me off the air, but lets me talk to the guy and tell the pit guy, this just happened, that's happened, this is going on. Didn't have to do that much because they were really good at it, but it was just another addition to make it faster and smoother.
Now, something, and maybe this might be unfair for me to say, I feel like the radio broadcast has always done a better job with the pit, working the pits, than the TV broadcast has done.
Well, there's a couple reasons there. You're absolutely right, and I'll tell you why you're right. Television, I like radio best. I really love doing TV. It was a lot of fun, but radio, I could call things that happen simultaneously and actually call all of them. Television, you had to follow the picture. And if the director didn't get it, then you couldn't deal with it, because if you talk about something that's off screen, it drives the viewers nuts. That was an absolute no-no if it's not on the screen. And so I remember, I guess it was a year Kevin Cogan came off of 4 and spun right down into the pits and hit a few things on the way. And I'm watching it out of the booth, but it's not on the screen. And I'm like, get the shot. So what I'm trying to say is television is somewhat limiting. It's compressed to whatever the screen size is, where radio is out there. It's theater of the mind, as we always call it. And it's a lot more fun to do in that regard.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it that way. Obviously, I never worked in the industry, and I didn't really think of it in those terms.
And it's funny that I like radio better and Bob likes TV better.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
just two different guys.
Huh.
But you talk about how really good the radio network is. The one thing I will say about it is, as I mentioned earlier, we were stationed in Germany in the mid 50s. And so I'm guessing this is maybe the 54 or 55 race was on the American Forces Radio Network, then called the Armed Forces Radio Network. And so we were listening to it. So I'm hearing Indianapolis. Across, we don't have satellites, or it costs like $12 a minute to make a phone call. So there wasn't a lot of communication going back and forth. But here I am. And since I would go to Indianapolis in the summer and visit my uncle and everything, and I'd been there a couple of times, I could see it, I could feel it, and just the fact that it brought me home. And I think what Sid did in that time, he created the magic for all of us, which later created the giant crowds, because a large group of people, that's magic. I got to go see that place. And just because of the way it was presented.
Yeah, and those were some amazing, the crowds are still big today.
Yeah.
But man, I have to believe that's correct. And how you presented that, because For whatever reason, and I don't know what it is, in IndyCar racing has taken its lumps over the year with the fans over the past period of time with fans for whatever reason. But boy,
I don't get it.
Indianapolis itself, I mean, when it comes race day to Indianapolis, it had a couple years that looked a little down, but boy, it's been good for a long time again.
Oh, it's been growing strong, and COVID knocked it down, of course. But
of course,
whatever that crowd was, whatever size it was, you would have thought that the place was full. They were so loud in the final laps of the race. The excitement was there, the electricity was there, and the crowd is also, that's part of the event. You've got to have the crowd. That's something that television, again, doesn't do well. They'll take a wide shot of the crowd. Oh, there's the crowd. Okay, I got that. But again, we can enhance some of those sound effects, mics and everything, and bring the crowd in, and the announcers will talk about them. So it becomes more specific.
Yeah, and you can really feel it, especially coming down toward the end of a race, and you guys, it's heated battles and that, and you guys were throwing it around the track, and you could really it could really start getting the hairs on your arms standing up better than TV can, I feel.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you because I love radio so much.
Right.
And I point to the Mirrors John Cock finish in '82. With 7 laps to go, they'd made their final stops and everything. And I realized I was using my stopwatch, and I was looking at the interval for a couple laps, and I hit the button. I said to the announcers, if my calculations are correct, those two will be side by side on the white flag lap. So that's what we're going to play. We're going to just focus on those cars. And they did. And, normally you may want to look a little deeper in the field, but in this case, that was the play. That was the whole race right there. And the guys were stupendous. I mean, you could hear on that final lap where they were by the crowd. And turn 1 screaming, now turn 2. It's, it was quadraphonic for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember listening to it on the radio, and it was just
it was
chilling. Yeah. And, of course, obviously, as we kind of touched on, you moved on to TV. And I remember I was up at one of the Chicago races. There's a track that was in Cicero. I forget the name of what they called it.
The Hawthorne Raceway. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for the IndyCar race, and went to the motel or the hotel that morning to meet some people. And I saw you in the lobby, and I saw you just kind of making the rounds and just kind of talking to some different people. Was that the kind of time of day where you'd kind of, greet people and also just try to start doing a little research on the day? Or
a little of both. I like to talk to people. I love the fans. But in talking with them, it gives me a gauge of what they want to hear and what they want to know.
Right.
And then, of course, here comes a driver or, crew member or something, how we were all basically in the same hotel or two. And you sit there, you talk with them, you get the emotional sense of who they are. And that made ultimately for a better broadcast, because I'm talking really to my critics. They're polite and everything. Well, not all of them, but most of them were polite. And you realize, hey, they really want to see this, like something I could never convince television of. And Robin Miller used to beat me up for the television until he went to work for television. Then he said,
right.
Oh, I see what you were up against. But I wanted to do more technology pieces. And they said the women wouldn't like them. And my experience talking to women was just the opposite. They wanted to understand it. And, their brains are kind of gauged to picking up that technical stuff. They're not happy unless they understand. And right. I'll talk to any number of female race fans that are probably technically better equipped than the testosterone male that we are, that always has the answer and really doesn't have anything.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Often when I talk to female fans, they are more interested in the technical side of the sport than they are just that whatever the other side, whatever you want to call
Right.
that side is,
Yeah.
the show business part or whatever you want to call it. Because they like you were kind of alluding to, they want to know how it works, and they want to kind of know why this is this, why that's that.
Right. And they're not satisfied until they know. They're excellent race fans. They're really good race fans. But,
I agree.
The networks, like, they're all the same. They're in New York. Those guys ride in yellow cabs, and so they, you could race maybe down Fifth Avenue if it wasn't so rough. They never. I mean, I worked with a few of them that got it, that understood it. I had a couple of directors that were awesome at it, but the New York, the executive producer level and stuff like that, they'd come out for the race because everybody had to be, because it was their big event. But they weren't really into it. They picked up the morning paper and hey, what do you think about AJ Foyt here? I see where you're coming from. You read the right column in the Star this morning. And we had a hard time getting it through that they weren't really doing it the way I think the fans wanted it done. They're better at it. The current broadcast crew is pretty awesome. But there's still the television requires so much coordination, to make sure you have the right camera at the right place at the right time and the director's cutting it well. And this year was a pretty good example. There was a new director, new producer. And if you go back and look at the start, you have a shot of them coming in alignment off of turn 4. And then the director cuts to a shot of the upper deck of the paddock penthouse to see the crowd, and pans down to see the green flags coming out, and then on further down to the track. The race had already started. I mean, they essentially missed the start. And so now I'm waiting. Okay, they got to go back and replay that at some point, or they got to take that turn 1 look and do like Formula 1 broadcasts are, and take a look at the start from a couple of different angles, but they never did. And that's when you realize they're well intended, but they don't always get it. Racing is pretty unique.
That drone they had was crazy. That huge drone.
Yeah. I saw it go by a couple times and it scared me.
Right. Hope they don't crash it.
Yeah.
You were saying racing's unique. In what way do you think the racing is unique? Because I feel the same way. I'm interested in what you're going to say.
Well, you remember Peter Jennings, the newscaster for ABC?
Sure.
He came to me once, and he wanted to come to the broadcast. He wanted to see what we did, because he viewed it, and it made really good sense. It's a sporting event, but we're actually covering a wide-based news event. There's 33 cars, track's 2.5 miles around. There's 500 miles. Anybody in that field can make the move that eventually makes the win at any time. So we cover it in reality more like you would cover news. And of course, we're a rooting press. I mean, we're excited. We're fans. We want to be in on it. But technically, you kind of look at it that way, that this is this massive event with so many things happening simultaneously that make so much difference. And you really have to understand the sport. And I'm not trying to be arrogant and say that I do better than anyone else, but race fans get it. And race fans, you're sitting with a person who's never seen it and start talking to them, you're making a fan out of them, because once they understand it, they're like, man, that is so cool.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's something I've always tried to do, if somebody has a question or a person, because if they're inquisitive, that means they're interested in learning more about it. And in fact, a good friend of mine, and actually someone I've introduced to Aaron recently, he's went to the last 3 500s with me that we were allowed to go to, and he's a big fan.
Yeah,
and he started out, and he doesn't know much, but now I've noticed every year he knows a little more about the drivers, a little more about this and that.
Yep.
And he's really turned into a big fan.
I have yet to meet the person that I bring to the track that doesn't become a fan. Yep. My daughter and her family live in Brooklyn, And one year she brought along like 4 of her best friends. They were all diehard New Yorkers. And with her sitting there in the grandstands and explaining it, the end of the race, they were like, "Oh, this is better than anything else we've ever seen." Racing draws the fans if you get them to the track.
So
when I first met,
excuse me one moment. I'm so sorry. I don't want to forget this. We talked about this a moment ago, and we kind of touched on it. And we were talking about the amount of fans that IndyCar racing has today versus kind of in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about splits and this and there, but all that's in the past.
Yeah.
We're going to say that, bygones are bygones. I think the racing today has been as good for the last 10 years as it's ever been.
It's been the absolute best of all racing series, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
I know everybody could say I'm prejudiced, but I think I can back that up with some real stats. And all you have to do is look at like the last 20 laps of the Indy 500. I mean, that was when Elio was chasing Paulo down the front stretch on that one lap, and Paulo was doing everything he can to shake him, and Elio was just cemented to the back of his car. It was like 2 jet fighters in a dogfight. Wherever he went, then Elio was right there. That's incredible. They're 240 miles an hour coming down that front stretch doing that. And it's 50 feet wide, ladies and gentlemen. You don't get that out of television.
I think that for whatever reason, and this is my opinion, we cannot get the average fan, whatever is considered an average fan. I have no idea, but let's say Joe Blow fan. We cannot get them interested in the personalities of the sport, and the personalities to me, what's always sold any sport. And for whatever reason, we've got some of the best personalities that IndyCar racing's ever had.
Yeah,
these guys, between the young guys all the way to Scott Dixon, they're all great guys, all got great stories. And for some reason, it's like we can't sell it. And I don't understand why.
It's a mystery to me too, because when I watch it on television as just a fan, I'm sitting there with a critical mind because I've worked it and I know what's happening. The one thing I learned from doing it myself is you don't ever really criticize the broadcast until you know what was going on, because quite often you're covering 3 cameras just went out. So we have to work around them and stuff like that. But bringing just putting that whole thing together and bringing it to a point and bringing it to the viewer or the listener, that's the key. And it's fun to do. It's a challenge.
One thing I definitely think of is really the social media aspect and also just the marketing aspect. I mean, you look at Formula One, Drive to Survive, and
that's a great series, isn't it?
Oh, I love that series. Yeah,
awesome.
and just think if IndyCar had something like that. I mean, that would definitely help.
I think they're trying to put something like that together.
That'd be awesome.
One thing you're looking at there is cubic dollars. When you have cars and teams that are sponsored not only by big deal corporations, but in some cases the country themselves, there's a lot of money there. That's why their television is so good. Here in the United States, we put cameras high and look down on the track because we can reduce the camera count. It's an economic thing. And the accountants definitely get into that. So, one year they'll say, well, lose 2 cameras, and you'll do it. And then the next day come back and say, well, you lose 2 more, because you covered it last year. The audience doesn't know what they're seeing, but they do see that. And they compare the coverage without verbalizing their comparisons. They just understand this is different. This might be better. And I think IndyCar can and will get better at that. But it's also financial. Essentially a camera is $10,000. And so you put 32 of them up or more to cover the Indy 500 and at least 20 to cover almost every other race, and a big road race like Road America, that's a whole bunch of cameras. And then all the different effects and the fact we are generally not wired stadiums. And what I'm saying there is football comes in, they back their truck in under the stadium. All the cables are hanging out the wall. It's all pre-wired. You go up, plug the camera in, plug the truck in, they're going. Almost every race, you have to relay cable almost every time. Some places are pretty good at protecting it, but, well, Road America, you're at one time a year with the full complement for the Indy cars. And you always end up having to replace some cable because the winter got to it or whatever. So the other sports can operate more cheaply. And some of the other sports don't have some of the weather negatives that we have. It's a bit of a risk for a network to decide that they're actually going to cover. And in fact, that's why networks look for a time buy. They'd rather just sell you the time, which is generally what happens almost all the time. It happened in my day. So the networks are, they're there to make money. And until we get that money coming in for everybody, we're going to still have an uphill struggle. And that's the quandary that I can't work my way out of. And apparently neither can anybody else. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's the best racing ever. That race at the 500, the 105th running, I've never seen a better race than that. That eclipsed my 1960 first experience. And they're doing it every weekend. And now we got this wave of the young guys coming in. And they're fearless. They do things with cars you couldn't imagine you could do. But you still have the Dixons and the Castro Neveses and those guys that are still out there. They're wily. They know the game. Castro Neves actually, I think, kind of teased Paulo a little bit.
I do too.
Castro Neves passed at what I would have thought was the wrong time. I was very worried about that last pass because I would rather have seen him wait until the white flag to do that. And he passed a lap earlier. I thought, geez, that's given him, because he's in trail and he's in the draft and everything, it's given him a chance.
But then there's a yellow.
What Elio was looking at was he knew he was crashing down on the back of the field. And if he didn't position himself on that lap, then he might have gotten totally caught up. If he was behind a car and that was approaching the field and picking up the draft from the back end of the field, then he would have been out of it. But he's calculating. He's a veteran. He knows all those things, and he made the move when it should have been made.
When you look at Pagano, and I didn't notice this at the time when it happened, I didn't realize Pagano had passed in the third, going down the back straightaway, and was passing Alex. Going across the start finish line, and he would have been all over Elio. Right. The proverbial one, if I only had one more lap, right? Every racer.
Exactly.
And, but he was a sitting duck. I mean, Haley, if there was one more lap, Haley was a sitting duck for Simon.
Well, I've been kind of referring to the race as youth and exuberance versus old age and treachery. And
right.
It's what it is. The veterans, it's amazing. They got that little computer working, and Elio could see this is going to happen this next lap. I know where all those other cars are. It amazes me how many of the guys actually glance up at the video screens from time, definitely during a yellow. But I looked up and I realized this was happening. And the veterans are just so good, but this young crowd is so amazing. So we got the best of all worlds.
I agree. It's the best mix I can remember in my lifetime.
Yep, me too.
I'm
a little older than you.
Yeah, I'm turning 52 this weekend.
That's not old. You're a puppy.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
But it's, so I kind of started watching the 70s and obviously through the 80s and 90s, and that it's just the deepest fields from front to back, you're right. The best talent,
In the 70s, 80s, through the 90s, I could probably have told you one of four cars that was going to win. I could tell you the four cars that were going to be there at the finish. Now I can't do that. The field is so deep and it's so good. You're taking a shot. And now you're looking. When I opened my bid on the radio network this last race, I decided to delve into tactics and strategy and what the teams were looking for, and what their lap what each stint was and how they calculated it, and then how to play the end game of the race. And I love to see and deal with that too. So it's I love all. You're just looking at a guy that's a race fan.
So you actually kind of were a little more than a race fan at one time. You did try your hand at driving.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, hey, I've said this before. If anybody who's brave enough to do it, I take my hat off to every time, because it had to have helped you to talk about it later on.
Well, it did. Robin Miller and I both raced Formula 4 at the same time, and then he went to midgets. It taught me a lot about. I was talking with this kid the other day who is definitely on the rise. His dad's an owner, and the kid's like 15, and he's going to come up, and we'll probably see him in an IndyCar in 5 or 6 years. And he was talking about running the shifter carts and everything. And so I said, yeah, well, that's cool, but there's no suspension. And so now you've got to get to something like a Formula Ford, which I've always recommended, because there's no power there. There's good suspension. There's no aero. So you have to know how to love the car, how to get it in and out of corners gently,
how to carry speed.
Yeah. And once you learn to keep that momentum up, and you don't want to watch Rick Mears when you see videos of him on the wheel. He's going into turn 1 and he goes like, he's minimizing the rolling resistance to the car. And that's what you learn in things like Formula Ford early on. So I like it that the whole series that they put together, the Road to Indy series, does include Formula Ford, even though they're now Aero Formula Fords. I had what today would be called Club Ford 1600, with no aero whatsoever. And I learned an awful lot from that. And I love to work on the cars. My son, who is with Andretti Autosports as an engineer, doesn't like me to work on cars. He looks at me and says, "What's the matter with you?" Or you can hear it. That's going on in the back of his mind. But Formula Ford taught me how to take the engine apart and how to work the anti-squat, the anti-drive, how to set the ride height on the car and all that. So now at least I could hold a conversation.
Sure.
My son and I were at lunch together today, and we were talking over some of the issues in the race, and one of them being the problems that they were having with braking coming into the pits. Stefan Wilson, you have to the carbon fiber, you have to pre-warm the brakes. So you got to be full into the throttle, but just kind of brushing and pumping a little bit on the brake as you go down the backstretch before your pit stop. And you saw a number of spins either coming directly into the pits or even down the pits. And a lot of that was attributable to the fact that the driver hadn't pumped it right. And in Stefan's case, I think they all the telemetry, you know everything now. That's kind of neat too. But he didn't start betting that until he came off of 4. Well, you need, I think 400C is probably the minimum you want in the rotor and pads for them to work properly. And you're not going to get them that hot in a short distance. So we saw stuff like that. And again, there's veterans versus new guys.
So when you started racing, did you start racing because you just wanted to be a race car driver, or did you do it more for kind of the TV aspect, maybe understand it more?
I started racing because I was the next AJ Foyt.
And that's why everyone races, right?
Yeah, I thought that maybe I had something in me to be a race driver. And it turns out I can really drive fast, but I can't race. I can I've laid down record laps at IRP in the Formula Ford. But now you get in with traffic and everything and some calculations, and I'm not nearly as good at it. And what that did do, though, was give me an appreciation for what the real guys do. It's so much over my head. And that's the other thing. I think a lot of people in the grandstand say, "Oh, no problem, I could do that," And let me tell you, they're doing things. They're turning a machine into an art form, and it's amazing what they're capable of doing with the cars. And the little brake thing, just being an example, you have to know how to run that car, and you have to know how to keep it working and keep the resistance down, keep momentum up. There's just a lot involved in that. It's not just going out. Hollywood always shows when you want to go faster that slam the throttle down again and change gears. And like, it's not quite how it works.
If you weren't already there to begin with, you were already in big trouble.
Yeah,
if you weren't in the
exactly.
right gear and the foot was on the floor, you were already in big trouble.
So I guess the full answer to that question was, at first I thought I was a racer. Then I found I enjoyed it. I mean, I could do well. I never won a Formula Ford race, but I had so much fun doing it, and the camaraderie of the paddock and stuff like that. And it taught me an awful lot. I kept doing it until I got the job with the network, with the radio network, and then my weekends were gone, so my racing was gone. So I retired.
Right. And I asked that question because I know when Rusty Wallace started doing the TV stuff, he actually got into IndyCar and tested it. So he, understood it more.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was pretty cool. One thing I want to talk about, I know everyone always brings this up to you, but you have to talk about Bobby Unser and Sam Posey. So, and I'm kind of young, so I never got to see it live. But I've seen the videos, and it's funny because there's actually a video on YouTube, and I'm sure you've ran across it. The title of it's like the one time Bobby actually agreed with Sam Posey.
Yeah, well, there was maybe two times.
Two times.
But what Bobby would do is Sam would say something, and you had the yin and the yang there. Right. You had this tough Bobby Unser, Albuquerque, sprint cars, midgets, the Pikes Peak hill climb, and then you had Sam, who came, he was an architect and well schooled, and came through the sports car ranks, and two entirely different philosophies, bringing those two together. Sure. So I'm in between these two guys. In fact, at one point, Jack LaRoute bought me a striped referee's shirt to sit between the two guys. But it was funny because Sam might say something, and then Bobby would say, "No, Sam, it's not that way," and he'd start talking. And he talked for maybe a minute or so, and he'd finally get around to the point where what Sam said was right, but Bobby had now said it, so it was right. Just stuff exactly. Like that. They were so fun to watch and so predictable on everything. And I think people thought they didn't like each other. They loved each other. I sat on a flight going to Sydney, Australia, it's a 14-hour flight, and the seats in front of me were Sam and Bobby. I slept. They talked that entire flight, just talking racing. They're both racers at heart, and they wanted to talk about it. They liked each other.
So when you were on air, did it ever get like? And obviously, looking back, it's hilarious. But when you were actually on air with them, did it ever get frustrating? Like, just agree with them or anything like that?
I would get frustrated on occasion when they'd lose track of what it was we were doing. Right. They kind of get into their own world, and we're trying to present a race. An example might be that one time at Indy, we had done a feature on something. It was something technical, but and we wanted to roll it in the race, and we worked pretty hard at it. And so the producer in the pre-meeting said, "All right, we don't want to talk about this until we're ready to roll that tape." And sure enough, like 5 laps into the race, Bobby starts into, explaining what we're about to try to put on in the feature. And I spun around, and he had trouble with his monitor, and he lowered his chair down in the booth. So his face was about at my hand's height. And I spun around and I hit him in the face, and I had my big 500 ring on and everything. And he just looked at me like a whipped puppy. But we had that. One of my favorite stories of Bobby is we had a thing that finally the network said we couldn't do anymore, but we called it Memorex. And that was before we had side-by-side. So if we went to a commercial, we were away 2.5, 3 minutes, a long time. A lot of stuff can happen. And then more often than not, as soon as we went to commercial, something in fact did happen. So this one particular race, it was in Michigan. Somebody spun, just brushed the wall, that kind of thing. Not a big deal. But it happened during a commercial. And so the director yells Memorex, which means they're going to back the tape up to about 30 seconds before the crash, come out of the commercial as if we were live, and narrate until the crash happens. Cool. I'm doing that. We're back live here. It's going on. And the crash occurs. And Bobby says, "He crashed again." Sometimes you need a little situational awareness on some of this stuff.
Oh man, that is so funny. My only time ever being around Bobby, I was actually in somebody's hotel room, and I'd fallen asleep on one of the beds, the old Speedway motel. And I
Yeah.
fell asleep on the bed, and it was one of those rain delays, and Bobby's waiting around to do the broadcast. And it was like 97, 98. I don't remember what year.
Right.
And man, I just keep hearing someone talk and talk and talk, and finally kind of wakes me up. And it's Bobby. It's just going off. He's just talking about how the teams don't have any money, and this is the early IRL days, and he's just. And he leaves in the guy's room we're staying. He goes, man, he is one of the most long-winded people I've ever met. But the guy loved him. It was another driver, and that guy just loved him to death. But he just, he was just making fun of how much he just talks.
A lot of people don't understand this statement, but Bobby, to me, was one of the most intellectually honest men I ever met. That is to say, if there was something that he didn't understand, television, how we did this, the race car, you name it, he would pester you until he understood it. And now it might take a half an hour to get him there, and you might have to come up with some different terminology to get everybody on the same page, but he would not let go if he didn't understand something. And he was, so in that regards, in other words, he never tried to pretend that he knew it. If he didn't know it, he'd tell you he didn't know it. And then he'd try to figure out how to know it. So it was cool. I love the guy.
Well, all those guys, and you see a common thread through all of them, how competitive they are. And that's part of that competition is just trying to, if you know something I don't, I want to know what you know and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And you're close in there. So you kind of see this, that almost everything is a competition, little things.
Oh yeah.
How many fans did I sign the autograph for walking out to the pits? Just, stuff like I did 22 when you do. That sort of thing. The greatest example of that is at the old Ontario Motor Speedway, and Bobby was involved, and AJ. And that track was identical to Indy, except it was 80 feet wide. And there was no close-in fence to the track in turn one. And so Bobby went out to turn one during a practice session, and he's just standing there, and here comes AJ, and Bobby waves at him. Well, AJ's got to wave back. That's a challenge right there. So then Bobby moves 3 feet further forward. Same deal. Finally, Bobby is almost standing on the racetrack, and he waits until AJ is probably 200 yards away and waves, and AJ waves back. That had to be like, wow. But they will fight on all race drivers will go after. They're like fighter pilots in that regard. They're just constantly at each other. Everything is a contest.
Yeah, the thing I think it's lost is, and you don't see this in IndyCar as much as you do as NASCAR, but on the surface, there's more of a rivalry than there is behind the scenes. Because at the end of the day, I think there's such a genuine understanding of each other that while this person may aggravate you, it's really not as bad as it seems. And not always. I mean, sometimes guys just don't like each other, but that's very rare.
Yeah, IndyCar has not had its share of fights since about the 80s.
Right.
But they all are pretty intense. I'm surprised there aren't more face-to-face confrontations out there, but part of that is the result of their assistants, their retainers, or whoever, that they're going to get them away from an incident if something starts to seem to boil a little bit. And then sometimes they don't get them away fast enough, and we got some great television.
Right. I mean, but the last real major confrontation I can remember was at Watkins Glen with Michael and somebody's dad. I don't remember whose dad that was.
Sam Hornish's dad.
Was it Sam Hornish's dad?
Yeah, and Tony, right? And Kanan?
Kanan was there too. Yeah, I don't remember the whole story.
It was Kanan and Hornish's dad. Yeah.
Is that what the deal was?
Yep. I forget what exactly happened, but they were the ones involved. And then obviously there were some Danica fights, Danica Milcaduno, stuff like that.
Well, now there's a gal I loved, and
Who, Milka or Danica?
No, Milka Duno. If you were up close to her, she was tough. She was strong.
Right.
And when
Smart,
she took
very
off,
smart too.
yeah,
I know.
when she took off after Danica at that one race,
Mm-hmm.
I thought, Danica, you better run because that girl's going to whip you.
Right.
Yeah. No, yeah, I could see that. I was in the garage area, and whoever I was just hanging out in their garage, she was next door, and man, she's smaller, but she was not small. I mean, she was.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
She was feisty, and she had some strength. I wouldn't want to take her on.
So one thing I wanted to ask about, so obviously, so the 90s was one of my favorite eras of racing. I was born in 92, so I don't really remember a lot of it, but I love watching old 90s races.
Yeah.
And when I think about 90s IndyCar racing, one of the first things that comes to mind is the Delta Force intros. And I'm sure people tell you that all the time, but you know,
I do hear it all the time.
Right.
Those were so fun to do. And if you go on YouTube and you search Paul Page and Delta Force, all of those opens will come up. We did, I think, 8 of them. And that was an interesting way. One of the directors was a guy named Don Ohlmeyer, who was a director, producer.
Mm-hmm.
He eventually became the president of NBC. But while he was president of NBC, he had a deal in his contract that whenever there was an IndyCar race, he could co-direct it. So you know, there are interesting dynamics out of that. And he always looked for how we're going to get this situation all put together as the best possible situation and make it entertaining to the crowd. For example, if you're going to interview a driver, I'm not going to put a hauler behind him. I'm not going to put an empty grandstand behind him. He'd work 3 or 4 minutes to make sure that the background had some excitement in it as well. So he was that kind of director. And he actually brought a lot to the sport. I think I'm kind of drifting away from your original question, but there are a few guys like that really helped, especially in the 90s, the way things were going and the way the coverage was. Did I get far afield of your question?
Oh, no, you're good. I don't know if I actually really even asked a question, but I guess my question to that would be, did you actually write that intro?
Oh, yeah. That was what happened. Don Ohlmeyer, again, loved racing. And so he'd come to the track. We would, usually on Tuesday night, we'd arrive at the Speedway. That was the scheduled arrival time. I'd be there all the time, but that was when the full crew came in. And Don would grab the tapes from, say, the last 10 years. And this is reel to reel stuff. It's not like your nonlinear stuff. And he'd find what he believed to be the best 3 minutes of shots he could find. Now, he was also a fan of John Frankenheimer, who was the director on Grand Prix. And he liked a lot of the effects that Frankenheimer used in the open of Grand Prix. And he often tried to imitate some of those effects. So he'd take the best 3 minutes of pictures he could. He'd string them together. So maybe there was a story there, but he was really looking for visual because his argument was television is visual. He'd do that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. About midday on Thursday, he would bring the tape to me and say, there it is, write to it. So I've got this product that it's kind of out there. I don't know how necessarily. So it usually took me a full day and a half to write that 3 minutes. But when we put the Delta Force music under it and everything, it was so cool, and we loved doing it. And after that, every year, that was the big thing when we had our final production meeting. That was when we played the open for what we called the tease for everybody at the ABC compound, and that would get us revved up. And when it came on the air, it would get it revved up. And the neat thing about it is you go to YouTube today, and there are still people up there imitating the Delta Force themes. And that's the greatest compliment you can have. I love doing those, and I'm glad that they were appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, so you've done some voice work as well. So obviously you were in Turbo, and you were in you were like you played yourself basically, right?
Right. Yeah. There I was me.
And you were also, you did voice work in the old Papyrus video games. Was there any other, am I missing anything, or were those
Yeah, you are, but I'm not sure I want to tell you. I was, when Driven came out, it came out to a premiere in Long Beach. That was horrible. It was the worst movie ever. So Stallone.
Yeah, but there's a beauty in how bad it is.
Yeah.
Let's be fair. I mean, sometimes things are so bad that they're beautiful.
Right.
Well, in this case, they knew it was bad. They got a lot of criticism. They took it back into the edit room and they re-edited a great deal of it. And then they called a guy named Larry Henry and Larry worked on the radio network, to come in and add voice to it. And we'd sync voice with the announcers that are actually on camera, things like that. And when they brought us in with the re-edited, I mean, I'm looking at a scene where a car spins and goes off the track into the edge of a pond, and then it's like a nuclear explosion. It's like, so we voiced it. He and I put together and linked that thing together. Oh, it's still horrible. It's still terrible. And it came out when the series was at Fort Worth, and everybody, of course, went to the theater on Saturday night because they wanted to see Driven, see how this came out, because the crews had been working in our midst for the last year or so. And again, it was horrible. And I'm in the back, and I'm kind of slinking down in my seat. I'm hoping that my voice isn't recognized. And when the film ends and they're rolling the credits, I'm like, oh no. I'm a SAG-AFTRA member, and it's required that the name of anybody who does voice performance in the film gets a credit in the film. And I said, please no. And I wasn't in the credits. And I'm yeah. But I'm working at the time with Parker Johnstone. And so Parker, a couple of weeks later, brings me a present. And he's taken the 6 sheet, the big sheets they put in the front of the theaters to advertise the film. And he's taken that, and it's the Driven poster. It was a cool looking poster, only he has had an artist ad featuring the voice of Paul Page. And I'm like, no, I don't want anybody to know this.
That's so funny.
He got at me a lot of times that way.
Well, I will tell you that I actually spent full price money to go see it in the theater. So, hey, not every choice is a winner, right?
No, that's true. And that one definitely wasn't. But, it's kind of interesting to be, that was the time when Spectrovision and the hotels was a big deal. Right. And it went from a major theater release to Spectrovision in 5 days.
Did it really?
Yeah, it was that bad.
Man, I didn't realize it was that quick.
Yeah, it went quick. And now I hear that they're thinking about doing another one. Please don't.
Now, is it going to be a reboot, or is it going to be Driven 2 where they pick up where the other one ended?
I don't know. I don't even want to think about it.
Maybe they'll contact you to do some voice work as well.
No, I'm retired. That's what they'll hear. I'm retired. I'm not, but that's what they'll hear.
And obviously, so outside of the Indy 500, you've done some other stuff. I know you did NHRA for a few years, and you also did X Games as well, right? For a couple of years. Yeah. And I was thinking and I was talking to Scott about this. I'm a big fan of rally racing. I think you did some rally, right?
I did the Global Rally Series, and we started it at X Games, what's become the different surface racing. And I'm reaching to try and remember what they've named it now, but we did a bunch of things at X Games that actually turned into great series later. Rally racing in its basic form, pro racing, but then a lot of other stuff as well. And if it's got a motor, I'm going to go narrate it,
Right. The one rally race of the X Games I always think of, and I think you were doing the commentating. It was when Colin McRae was racing. I think it was Tanner Fouts, and he flipped.
Yep.
Right there at the finish line. Yeah.
Yeah. That was pretty cool. That was shot down in Anaheim at the soccer stadium down there.
Is it the LA Coliseum, or was that somewhere else?
No, it was in the Anaheim soccer station. The last couple of events I did were in the LA Coliseum,
Right.
where they went up to the peristyle and the columns, and they came down the hill from
Right,
that
right,
and
right.
circled around. But yeah, those were fun to do. It was also amusing to me when I was approached by the network and they said, we're going to put somebody else in the chair. One, they picked Todd Harris, who at the time was one of my best friends. We had done a lot of work together, including X Games. And they were saying, we need to get that younger demographic. And I'm thinking, I'm doing X Games for you and accepted there. What's a younger demographic than X Games? That's not the kind of thing you say to the big network bosses, but certainly what we were thinking.
Well, you've obviously you've kind of been the fan, you've been a driver, you've been an announcer, you've been on the inside of the sport, various levels, very different series. If someone come to you today and said, you're the czar, and this may not be fair for me to ask, and we can cut it out if you don't want to answer it. But like someone said, you're the czar of, we're going to make IndyCar racing bigger today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you think? I mean, what do you think they would have to do, in your opinion,
To improve it?
to improve it, to improve it, to get more numbers and get more people?
Since our television numbers are only so to begin with, I would like to see taking a plain sheet of paper and rethinking the whole thing. Obviously, I think a lot about how we covered it, and things that we did do and things we didn't do and things we could have done but may not have. An example of changes that I would consider making, one year when they put up the new fences and they were higher, Olmeyer and the rest of our production group, the top group, went out to the Speedway, and we thought those fences are going to be in the way of all of our outside the track cameras. So we also put a whole circuit of cameras inside the track, and those cameras caught the speed much better than the cameras tying outside. Again, it goes back to being financial too, though it's cheaper to put 5 or 6 cameras doing the course coverage than it is to put a bunch of them down low, because you need more cameras to do it. But for example, we had a camera that was in the center of the backstretch that could pick the cars up on the backstretch and start following them all the way through 4. And at the time, some of those grandstands weren't quite there yet. And so you wouldn't see the car the whole time, but you're panning across those grandstands and then the car appears. That gave the most incredible impression of speed I'd ever seen. And so I really like to take a new piece of paper and say, let's just forget everything that's been done. It's all been good, but let's think of other ways we can do it. And putting in, verticals that the car goes past, that's a good thing. We tried to do that on a wall at Michigan once, but it turned out to be too expensive to paint it up the way we wanted it. But I'd like to go back, and I'd like to pay a lot more attention to audio. The audio is pretty good now, each camera able to cover things. I remember we did Road America once, and we didn't have any mics down in the first turn. And here are these guys slamming down that hill and coming down through the gears and everything, and you couldn't appreciate it. So I would spend, they can now, but I would enhance it even more. I think sound is very important to the video. And so I think a lot about how we do that. And then I'd think about how we do the pit coverage. So we actually get something interesting. For example, it's always shot from the front. And it'd be neat to, when I watch a pit stop, when I'm just out there hanging, it's exciting to watch the car from the rear. And what's even more exciting is because you can see more. You can see those 2 guys on the rear tires really working. You got a pretty good view of the refueler. You don't have the driver, which is what the directors always want to say. But when that car leaves the pit, as I think it is so violent. Mm-hmm. That thing is just spinning, it's gone. And then the pit crew and all the fans around that particular crew will cheer. Mm-hmm. Great stop. Yeah. We never get that on. So those are the kind of things that we ought to get on. And we need to get more of the people. I was talking the other day with Dave Papaloritz, who was a longtime IndyCar mechanic and is now running the restoration shop at the Indianapolis Museum, Speedway Museum. And he was talking about the pit stops and also the people. We were talking about an old producer named Fred Bailey, who he had a company named Championship Race Films. You can get up, the footage is owned by the Speedway now, but it's up on the internet. You look at those early races, and Fred was really good at integrating the crowd, not just a wide shot of the crowd. I mean, he'd get in tight with people. And while he was doing it on film, so there was some editing available, but he'd catch the crowd when something happened and everybody stood up. That shot would be there, and it would be in his films. Things like that. Let us know who the crowd is. Let us meet some of those people in the crowd. And that isn't, let's go sit with them with an interview. No, let's see them when they're fans and they're yelling and screaming. So look at it with a whole new look. And what do we have to lose? So.
Yeah, I think so basically what you're saying, in how I would take it, is just look at it more from a production viewpoint, meaning you're almost producing a TV show, or more than covering the action, you're actually making the action come alive.
Yeah, but
is what I'm trying to say.
Then you have to go back, though, and once you got all those great ideas, now you have to go back and figure out how to pay for them.
Right.
And right now, and for a number of years, money's tight.
Sure.
And to get a network to step out on a ledge like that and try some of those things, hey, we get this rating by doing it this way. So that's cost effective for us. Why would we change what is cost effective? And that's a business approach to it. And that's the way the networks have to work.
It's interesting that you mentioned, there's two things that you mentioned I found interesting. One about the pit stop from the back, because when that car leaves the pits, and if there's one in front of it, how hard they have to turn out. And then if they got that another car coming in that maybe 2 stalls ahead that's got to cut over, it shows the fan how tight that really is.
Yeah.
More than the front does. The front can't capture what that does. No, you're right about that.
Everything looks wide open from the front. And just little things like you see the guys pushing on the wing to get the car going. And I think everybody assumes that's just to overcome the low gear. And it's not. Its purpose is to get the cars back in to move, so it comes out at a better angle. So they're actually pushing the car to the side to get it to fly out of there. And that would be very clear on video taken from the back. And more innovative just camera placement and work. Sure. I was the guy who invented, though I don't get any credit for it, I invented the ant cam. And that's the camera that was in turn one. And when we were doing the cameras around the inside of the track and we're walking the track, and why couldn't we put a camera right here at the edge of the asphalt with, one of the tiny little 1/2-inch lens cameras, and put it on a spring so it's up, but if a car would run over it, it would not damage the car. It would just go down into its hole and then pop right back up again.
I think NASCAR,
the ant clam.
I think NASCAR calls it the gopher cam, I think.
Yeah. Well, everybody's doing it now. You see it in Formula One and everything. We've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of innovative cameras that you would like to see, that actually will not just novelty, but tell you something as well.
And I just remember the camera.
I agree.
I just remember the camera they used to have on that outside wall with the flowers. I don't know whatever happened with that, but
I got a great story for that. That the one you're probably thinking of was the turn 4 robocam.
Okay.
And the wall is so ugly, and there's cables running along it and all kinds of stuff. And it's just a concrete wall. So we went out and we put flowers around it to dress up the shot a little bit. And somebody from the Speedway went out and saw that and ordered them away immediately. Why are flowers sitting next to our wall? And you run into a little bit of that, some turf sovereignty, where they may not understand television, but we've got to do this my way. And you got to get around that stuff too.
I always kind of found it. I always personally found that view as an interesting juxtaposition, and maybe it wasn't intentional, of the speed of the cars and the power of the cars versus just kind of that beauty of nature type thing, where those flowers are there and the cars would fly by them and they'd move.
Oh, you'd see them, yeah.
And always
shockwave.
And I always felt that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition,
Yeah. And it the fact that shockwave mostly from the nose going over, but you'd get it twice. You get the nose and then you get the tail, and so you get and if you paid attention, if we slowed it down, we could actually probably could have visualized the nose wave and the tail wave. Yeah, things like that. You had a great idea there. Let's go with the flowers and see what we can see when they move. Right.
And you were talking about showing the crowd, and I've got a photo here at the house from when a totally different sport, obviously, when Reggie Miller hit a big shot against the Knicks, and whoever took the photo has a shot, but he has the crowd, and it's in the garden, right? And he killed them in the garden. And it's all these people's faces. This ball hasn't went in yet. And people are holding their eyes and they're covering their mouths, and you can tell there's agony because a lot of them sense that he's going to do it to them again.
Right.
And that's a little bit like what you were talking about with capturing the crowd a little bit. And I always feel that those things, while at the time may not seem like anything, it really adds something that maybe the viewer's not even aware of.
Yeah, and often that happens. The viewer is especially aware, doesn't know why, of when things are done a little cheaper. They know that's okay, but they don't know why they think that it's not as good as it was. And the shot you're talking about, you got to think about it from a television point of view. You're going to have to dedicate a camera. Again, 10 grand to be able to get that shot. And then that's such an iffy shot anyway. I mean, you could have had that ground level at the start line when Elio crossed the line. It probably would have been an awesome shot. But then you also, how would we cut it in? Maybe you cut it in a replay, things like that. But there's a lot to be discussed there. And with the technology, we can do a whole lot more. I was talking.
Yeah, it's getting easier, I think, like you said, and like you said, is figuring out ways to do it.
Yeah, to use the technology to make it actually look better. I was talking. I was out at the restoration shop at the Speedway Museum and talking with one of the TV guys that works for the museum, and we were trying to come up with ways for him to do a feature that would be interesting and explain some things technologically. And we came up with a couple, like, why not we ghost the hands of two different drivers on the steering wheel and compare at the same time, not side by side, but ghosted, dissolved over one another. How are they turning that wheel? And this guy's a puller. He pulls down. He's normally in this position, and just little things like that if you spend a lot of time and think about it, they're really interesting. But then you also have to figure out how do you pay for it.
Right.
And then that's always the rub. If you're the NFL, you can have anything you want. But auto racing, even NASCAR, Formula One, we're all in the same boat in many ways. There's television usually gets the lesser budget of everything they're doing.
Well, those open checkbooks of the 90s and the early 2000s are long gone.
They're gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I would call open checkbooks, at least. I mean, those days are long gone, Yeah.
Well, when I first started at network television, I started actually with NBC, and that's where I met Don Ohlmeyer. And here's this massive race fan. He had the power to make the financial people. He got them under his thumb. and we've got to have this. And he had the dynamics and the power and the reputation to get that done. But getting that done today, we talk about, Gary Gerald and I have often talked about, we were there when the networks were networks. When they actually spent a lot of money to get things right, and they haven't done that for 20 years. And so you're losing some value, some visual value out of the whole thing. But I think you and I both agree, what we saw at the Speedway, what we've seen all this year has been some terrific racing. And I don't think it's television's problem to get the word out. They're putting the races on.
Right.
They're doing a hell of a job, but they've got to find better ways to get the advance going. And that's hard.
It is hard. I think, and this is nothing against Tony George and his family. But I personally feel that sale couldn't have happened at a better time.
I agree with you. If that hadn't happened, I don't think we'd have a Speedway today.
Oh, no.
I don't think so either. And I think without, of course, COVID was looming and we didn't know it.
Yeah.
Boy, I shudder to think what would happen to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, Roger, first of all, has the wherewithal.
That's right.
He's got a lot of backers, and he can do it when other people can't. He also, one of his real advantages that Tony George never seemed to have, his grandfather had it, where Roger can pick the phone up and call the chairman of IBM or, one of the ATT, one of the major corporations, say, I need you to do this.
Or even the president.
Yeah.
Well,
it'll happen.
Years ago.
Yeah. So he's that guy. And for a long time, we didn't have that guy that could really get into the boardrooms and say, not only get into them, but say, we're going to do this. This is going to be fun. And it's going to make some money.
I will tell you that me personally, I have looked back now, and in my personal opinions, against, with the split and all that, I was kind of hard on Tony. Because he wanted, was on the guys of getting open wheel guys. Well, I come from an open wheel background, and it still takes a lot of money and to do it. And I didn't see how these guys were going to be able to keep this thing going. You might be able to lift them up. Like I keep saying, I can give somebody their truck and trailer and the race car, but you still got to get to the races every week.
Yeah.
I look back now, and I was a little unfair, I think, on my opinions. I understand what Tony was trying to do. And I get it. I do. But it was such so many things were just kind of odd timing, and
the execution was not good.
Yeah.
And I think, and there are other journalists that'll get into this with me, but I think Tony has a good heart.
I do too.
I think he really loves the sport. He did not have the wherewithal to face some of the dynamics, when owners are walking out and not racing and holding the Michigan 500 and all that silliness that happened then. The ideas he had for the series, a lot of them were good. Let's get at least 2 tires in here. Let's let the guys actually open the engine and work on it, not just take it in a box. And, you get a little box and an engineer and you can't touch the engine. Only the engineer and his people can. Let's get some competition there. Let them build their engines. Of course, the counter side of that okay, I'm racing a Chevrolet and I've tweaked it up myself and it blows up. Now Chevrolet gets a bad rap because of my poor engine building. Tony had it figured. His primary goal, I believe, was to protect the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
I agree.
And what happened, I think, was that he had a lot of bad advice. He trusted a lot of people, and there were a lot of people just trying to create their own little empires. And it came back to bite him. But I think his intentions were good. I really do.
Well, I think if and you know this better than I do, because I'm fringe at best. But I feel that he should have had more say, because he did own the biggest sandbox, the most important sandbox to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe the familiarity of having known him since he was a kid may have not given him the respect he was due.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's a good observation.
And that's looking back with the lens of an older person today versus when I was younger.
Yeah.
But I feel that the team owners and that's just Tony. He's the grandson, and I've known him since he was 1-0-5,
Yeah, they didn't show him respect that I think he was due.
Yeah, and he made their lives hard. Maybe not at first, but in the end, he made it tough for him. And I think when you own the most important piece of the puzzle, you should be given your due.
Yeah. And everybody was trying to, the rest of the group of owners, or at least most of them, were trying to take control of the Speedway. And that's something that Tony, as just a member of the family and chairman of the board or president of the Speedway, he could not and should not have allowed. And he tried, but he got hammered from all sides, and he didn't have good advice. He didn't have good help.
Right. I agree with that. I will tell you that out of all that, though, he made one of the most important safety advancements in racing history.
The safer barrier.
The safer barrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can have opinions on this side or the other, but I don't care what NASCAR tries to promote. That's Tony George. That's the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and they can never take that away from him.
Well, that's what I say. He had a good heart. He was thinking in the right direction. He didn't have all the help he needed.
I agree. I do. I absolutely agree with that. Well, I, for one, just want to say thank you. I typically have a closing question.
Wait a minute. I got to do this, or the publisher will get really mad.
Oh, you got one? Oh, no.
Oh, is it a poster?
Version.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, so that makes me the question of this: are you doing an audiobook version?
Yeah, I've just started it. I had, book came out in May, and May was kind of busy for me. And so just a couple of days ago, I started laying down chapters. I'm doing it here in my home because I have the equipment. We do a lot of voiceover out of homes now and have for a number of years. So I've got the equipment, and it's not easy. It's fun to do, but there are a lot of stops, rereads, back, pick it up. So there's a couple of edits, and it takes a while to do. It's more complicated than I thought. I'm going to just sit down and read the book. And then the publisher, I said, I'd like to do like a director's cut and explain some of the stories that are in there more fully. You can't do that. The standard of the industry, you can't change in the audiobook what the book was with the same ISDN number. So it's complicated. So I'm recording it, and hopefully it'll be out soon too. And I might sneak in a comment. Maybe they won't catch it.
Now, can it be bought Speedway?
Yeah,
as well.
Gift shop. They kept running out of the book.
Really?
Did they really? Oh, that's awesome. I want to. That's where I'm gonna get my copy at. I'm gonna go buy it Saturday. I've been meaning to buy it. I just haven't had a chance yet. But when we do the introduction for this, I promise you, I'll hold up a copy of that book.
Oh, what do I have to pay you?
Just your never-ending love and respect.
Well, I hope you enjoy the book. It was fun for me. I've gotten some very good feedback from people who I appreciate, and the whole idea of the book was to start in 1960, the first year of the race for me, and bring it forward to the 100th race. Part of that was me. The best history of the Speedway prior to that was a book called 500 Miles to Go, written by Al Blemker. And he stopped in 59. So I wanted to pick up where that left off and bring it up into the present. So we used the races themselves as the frame on which we hung all the other tales. I'm at this race doing this, and oh, by the way, this happened, that happened, this happened. I think it worked, and we were also putting our foot in a couple of different camps. We were trying, same as we do with television, trying to bring in somebody that's never done it before. They might find something in there that's enjoyable and causes them to read on, and at the same time satisfying the real devoted railbird race fan. And I'm still not sure if we actually accomplished that completely, but it's certainly what we tried to do.
Oh, I'm sure it's excellent. And one of the reasons why I didn't get it before we did this, because I didn't want to ask you questions about it, because I want to try to leave the book as much as possible.
Well, I'm around and available.
So maybe after we get a chance to read it, maybe we can go through and do the stories a little more in depth. And I typically have always had a question at the end of these where I ask the person kind of who was their maybe it's an unsung person.Maybe it's somebody that nobody else would know about, but that one person that meant so much to you getting started in racing. A lot of this has been directed toward drivers, obviously, because we've had a lot of drivers on. But same to you. I mean, obviously, your uncle took you to the race and that sort of thing. But is there somebody that, it could be Sid, it could be your uncle, it could be whoever?
Well, Sid certainly was part of that. But if you want one single crystal moment, it would be Jimmy Clark.
Wow.
He first came to the track. Everything else was front engined, and those guys were rough and tumble, and they'd go to the white front bar and get in fights at night and everything. And they were pretty much unapproachable if you were a journalist, especially you were a young journalist with your silly little recorder trying to get interviews. And as Sid pointed out, not really knowing how to interview. But I went up to ask him for an interview. He was great with me, and he made me better than I was in the way he conducted the interview. And then he sat there and talked with me for probably half an hour.
Wow.
And I thought, this is this incredible world driving champion, and he's taken time out for me. And he did that for a lot of people. But that told me that there are race drivers with really good hearts out there. And the truth is they all are. But a lot of them just don't want to show it.
That's right. If people really knew all the things that Foyt did for other people,
oh my God,
they would never believe it. They would
no.
never believe it.
He has helped more people than we can count. And you'd be hard put to identify what he had done, but he was always behind some help somewhere.
That's right. That's exactly
You're talking about Jim Clark. There's actually a photo online. It's probably from that same interview. There's a photo of you interviewing Jim Clark.
Yeah. Yeah, that photo's in the book as well.
The book, right.
The microphone that I was using there was something I just bought from what later became I forget what but it was at the time it was called Radio Shack, Allied Radio Shack, and I guess it ended up being Radio Shack. But it was a wireless microphone, and it had a reel-to-reel recorder, so I could set the reel-to-reel recorder over on one of the 50-gallon drums, and then walk back and forth and just if I turned the mic on, it would start the reels turning and recording. And a lot of people thought that was neat and then would ask me about it, Clark being one of them. But I also, as a newsie, covered when Robert Kennedy came to Indianapolis the day that Martin Luther King was shot.
Oh, wow.
Assassinated. And I was there at 19th and Broadway, and we, the media, knew that he had passed, but most of the crowd didn't. And the police and the city were trying to talk Bobby Kennedy out of not making the appearance, just let everybody ought to go home. He refused to do that. He got up on this flatbed truck, and he gave an amazing speech. And I will rush to point out to you, in all of those shots, my microphone is on the far right, and it's distinctive because it had a square base and a round top. It's the same one I used for Jimmy Clark. So that's my claim to fame there.
Wow, I had never heard that. Of course, I forget. Everybody forgets you actually had a whole nother life in news and that sort of thing. Which brings us to a question I know Aaron wants to ask you about a football field.
The biggest touchdown that Speedway High School ever had.
And it's funny because
Aaron?
I mentioned, no, you're exactly right. So I say the name Paul Page to like my mom the other day, and one of the first things she said was, "You guessed a helicopter crash." It seems to be something people always say when you bring up your name.
Yeah, they do. And it's in the book. It actually opens the book because talking about the peaceful December afternoon, and we were just roaming out on the west side of the city, and then suddenly the main rotor system failed, so we couldn't auto rotate. We were just a homesick brick heading for this athletic field and Speedway, and kind of being thankful that we I don't know that it went through our minds then, but certainly afterwards, that we could have hit that high school. We could have,
Sure.
that could have been horrible. It could have killed people. And as it was, when I was laying on the ground under the helicopter, I had a goose down jacket because it was starting to get cold, and I was covered in avgas, just soaked in avgas. And I'm sitting there thinking, this could light up at any second. I was really apprehensive about that. But there's a fire station just west of the high school.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw it and just came. There was no run dispatched or anything. And I think there was some frustration later with the dispatchers trying to get truck so-and-so, where are you? You know, well, they're already on the scene. They actually drove through the fence of the athletic field, just knocked it down so they could get to the crash and pull us all away from the gasoline. And that was a pretty big moment. And it was pretty bad injuries for all of us. So.
Well, let me ask you this. You know, I think because, you know, I've heard you talk about it, and it's always talked about in a lighthearted way.
Mm-hmm.
But in a serious moment, I mean, it's truly life or death. I mean, how far did that thing fall from the sky?
We were at 500 feet above the ground when the failure occurred, which was our general, that was like our cruising altitude. And yeah, it was a life-changing moment. It changed my life a great deal, especially since I've just done my first 500 as the voice of the 500. And I suddenly realized what race drivers realize. This can be gone in a second.
Right.
And it changes your approach to life and how you deal with people and how you enjoy the moments that you're living through. And it did that for me. And I just thank God that I was able to get through it and go on to this wonderful life.
What, I mean, since it fell that far, I mean, I would think the damage, the wreckage would be massive. What,
Oh,
I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Get the book. There's a picture of what's left, and it isn't much. I mean, you can't identify an aircraft out of it.
What do you think was the one thing that helped save your lives?
In my case, when I was in the Army, when we were riding in helicopters, there was this like quiet thing. If this helicopter is in trouble, going to auto rotate or something, get your belts off. Get that monkey cord disconnected, because you don't want to be with it when it crashes and bursts into flames. And you know, part of that, like with the Hueys and everything, if they hit flat, the rotor blades would flex and break off, and then they'd be whirling around out there. You didn't want to be part of that. So that's the one thing that I did. I think it saved my life. Is I don't remember doing it. I'm amnesic to the crash. I wasn't unconscious, but I just can't remember it. But I think that is what saved me. The other guys, their belts, they stayed on, the photographer and the pilot, and the aircraft hit just kind of rolling a little to the right. It was rolling with the engine torque because there was no rotor working for it at all. And so when it hit, I'm on the right side, and I got squirted right out the front of the bubble, according to witnesses. The other two guys had their belts on though, and so what happened to them was those belts, racing belts, have a stretch to them, and I think those aircraft belts were like 11%. So they became rubber bands, and these guys hit, bounced up into the belts, and the belt slammed them down again. They both had horrible back injuries.
Oh, okay.
I essentially just had my lower left leg. It wasn't amputated, but it was trying to be. And when I finally got a chance to look at it, my foot was alongside my knee, and I went, this is a problem. This is a problem.
Wow, that's wow. We're glad it turned out the way it did. And
well, I am too.
Oh, I'm sure you are. And you know, you've given everyone so much enjoyment over the years doing something you enjoy, which is, I mean, that's the best ever, right? Something you enjoy brings enjoyment to others. And
I always thought that my technique in the broadcast was I was bringing a fan to the track and showing it to them for the first time and showing them my passion, my excitement. I often tried to visualize somebody sitting next to me that would be, I'm explaining stuff to them, and I'm showing them how much I love it and hoping they receive it. That was always the way I approached the broadcast.
So if you were to look back at just one moment of your whole career that you would be most proud of, what would that be?
Oh man, that is really, really tough. That's harder than you think to answer.
Right. Oh no, I bet.
I'm exceedingly proud of the John Cock Mears finish, because that team was so bound together on that one. I was pretty proud of the way I handled this year as the old guy in the back of the radio network booth. There's no single occasion. I was lucky enough to have a number of good occasions throughout my time, and you know, there are a whole bunch of little things that turned out to be really great and unexpectedly great.
Right. No, I can only imagine.
Well, Paul, I personally, I want to say again, thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
you know, and hopefully we can do something like this again.
I'd love to.
Yeah, it'd be great to talk to you again.
Here we go. This is commercial going by.
I love it. I love it.
How's that?
And,
I love it.
I think you'll like it. I do. I hope.
Oh, I will.
give it
I'll
a
love
shot.
it.
And then find me, and we'll. I've been signing autographs and personal autographs, and I like signing. I talk to the people a little bit and say, you know, find out about them, and I always try to not just the hi Steve, thanks kind of.
Right.
I like to write something to Steve himself.
Do you know if you're doing any book signings?
I was talking today with a bookstore called Autosport Aerosport in Los Angeles, and they want me to come out there and do some book signings.
Okay.
I did over this past weekend. I was in Fort Wayne, interestingly enough, with the Freemasons, and they bought a bunch of the books, and we worked out a deal. We gave them a big discount on the book, and all the profits were going to what they call the Brotherly Relief Fund, which is families in trouble. You don't have to go through a bunch of red tape. Somebody's going to come and write you a check. So that was nice. And my first time at really sitting down for a couple of hours and talking to and signing books for people. And I just enjoyed talking. I like, you can see I love talking. I'm talking too much.
Oh no, you're good.
No.
But no,
Hey, we ain't even got started yet.
Oh,
we did.
If you think you talk a lot, Scott is king.
How long was our chili bowl broadcast?
We did a chili bowl thing, like pre-race stream, and it was like 3 hours. Wow. And then we talked for another 2 hours.
3,
afterwards.
Yeah, 2 or 3 afterward. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a little unknown fact here. This is a little trivia for you. The 2004 race, Buddy Rice. Rain, terrible day. Rain started, stopped, and finally it's red flagged. We were on the air at ABC for 8 hours and 17 minutes, all from the broadcast of the Speedway.
Wow.
And that's a record for a single sporting event. The Olympics, yeah, they're on, but it's a bunch of events. It's a single sporting event. And then at the end of that broadcast, we interviewed Buddy actually in the green room of the pagoda in the tower. And then there were tornado warnings. And the Speedway is saying, evacuate, go to your cars and all that. I'm in the booth. I didn't hear that. And so we come out of the booth and we look around, there's nobody there. And I walk down to the ground level and across to the pits, and Gary Gerald's kind of huddling under a couple of tarps trying to stay out of the rain. And there were tornadoes all around us, especially on the south side. Gary and I went over to the catering tent where after the race, they always had a big steak dinner. And there was nobody there. The steaks were all there. The food was all there. So he and I got our steaks, sat down, we're eating, and we're hearing all these sirens go off and everything. We didn't care. We didn't care until actually the water was up around our ankles and everything. Maybe we ought to get in our car and get out of here. And I did just that, and I never stopped. I hit all green lights. There's no traffic. It was surreal.
That's crazy. Yeah, I had a buddy call me. He was leaving that race, and he had to drop down the south side, and they got stuck in traffic for quite some time because the tornado went across there and knocked over some semis and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there was some very serious damage on the south and southeast side. Yeah. But we were oblivious. We were just two guys having a good time.
And steak with nobody bothering you. I mean, it's like it's like my dream.
I was stupid. I should have grabbed like 5 or 6 of them and taken them home.
Yeah, of course. That's what I would have done.
Yep.
Have you ever like talked to someone on the phone, or maybe someone didn't recognize you and you started talking and someone was like, I know that voice?
Yes. The place that it does happen that can sometimes be a little problematic is in a bar. I'll be sitting there and I like scotch. I'm having a nice scotch or something, and somebody down the bar, I know that voice. Who are you? I know who you are. Like, I'm just trying to have a little cocktail here. Right. You're never quite sure where they're going with it, but yeah, that happened. In fact, I was in place called Palm Cove in Australia, up on the Coral Sea, northeast part of Australia. And I'm walking down this brick street. I'm vacationing a little bit there. And I start talking, and this guy behind me says, "You're Paul Page." I'm like, whoa, I'm in the middle of Australia, and somebody recognizes the voice. That's
pretty cool.
That was cool.
Yeah.
Aaron had his first touch of that at the Speedway when somebody walked up to him and asked him if he did this podcast.
We had maybe 50 views on this podcast, and some guy walked up to me and he was like, "Are you Aaron?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "You're in the Racer to Racer podcast." I was like, "Yeah." And I was just like blown away. But it was weird. But yeah, well,
it felt good though, didn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it felt good.
That's funny.
Well, once again, Paul, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been definitely a huge pleasure for me as well.
I've enjoyed this thoroughly. It's good conversation when you talk to people who really know their racing. It makes for a good time.
Well, we'll catch up again. We'll do this show again, and we'll catch up outside of this too.
Okay, you got it. Thanks for the time.